away from it all. By Lynne Patrick.
I'm amazed families survive holidays. 50 weeks a year they go their separate ways, and then it's a fortnight of compulsory fun and perfect harmony. Ben's trained Rachel and Joanne to groan and duck their heads whenever we pass a car with a GB sticker. We go to Corfu or Benidorm if we wanted to spend our holiday with Brits, he says. Since he barely speaks a dozen words of non-Brit, that makes pretty sure he doesn't have to talk to anyone for the whole 2 weeks. Not that Ben talks much at all. Over the past 17 years, he's polished the half sentence into an art form, and Joanne reckons she can even tell the difference between a yes grunt and a no grunt. He won't change. If anything, he's getting worse. We planned this holiday in monosyllables. Now we talked. We sorted out Iraq, Northern Ireland, New Labour, the entire world, sitting on the rug in front of your log fire. We never missed an opportunity to explore each other's souls. Ben isn't much interested in souls. He prefers football. So it was such a relief to find I still had a soul, however undernourished. That's the trouble. The soul you nursed back to life is demanding attention. And where am I supposed to fit that in this next fortnight, between the shopping and cooking and planning and bullying to make sure we all have a good time? Rachel's at the stage where every conversation ends with the door slamming. And Joanne's so enthusiastic about everything, it's exhausting. If I'd known you 13 years ago, I'd swear she was your daughter, not Ben's. It's like a bereavement, isn't it, the end of a love affair? My concentration's shot to pieces and everything's so irritating. I'm in a sort of no man's land between the past and the future. We were up before daylight yesterday. We sailed from Portsmouth. I wondered about the tunnel, but a cross-channel ferry is all the adventure Ben can handle. The overnight hotel was a success. You'd have cornered the patron and asked a string of questions without caring about your half-baked French. Ben sent me to ask for a table for 4. We ordered poulet frite all round because I couldn't be bothered to work out the menu. Rachel eyed up a dishy man a few tables away. I wanted to tell her his wife was only putting the baby to bed, but I thought, better not. Afterwards, when we went for a walk, she strode off up the street ahead of us. She does it to wind Ben up. It worked. It always does. Next morning we were held up by a procession of cars, all moving at snail's pace and hooting their horns. Heads were peering out of sunroofs and every bumper and door handle trailed flowers. There was a big placard flapping over one windscreen and Joe tried to read what was painted on it. Convoy d'amorous. It's a wedding procession, I said. Convoi dangereux. Mine are fascinating facts, aren't you? Ben said. How'd you make that out? Someone told me in a bar or a bakery a couple of years ago. It's a play on words. Dangereux and dange heureux. Dangerous and happy angels. The procession from the church to the reception is a country tradition. I like to practice my French. Chat to the barman or the shop assistant. Ben says I'll get myself into trouble one day, talking to strangers. Actually, I think he envies me. He finds people very hard work. You're like me. You talk to anyone. That was how we met, in a pub on the edge of a village. I'd been out sketching. You stood out in the crowd in your scarlet cagoule. Red for danger. Dangereux. Suddenly we were there. The gîte looked exactly like the photograph. Stone walls, steep tiled roof, just one door. But it's lovely. cool and airy. Just the one window, but the door's half glazed. The walls must be a foot thick, and the fireplace works because it's stained with smoke. The furniture's solid too, not a bit like the sale room junk you find in holiday cottages at home. The fridge was stocked with milk, butter and eggs, and something garlicky in greaseproof paper. There was even a bottle of wine. And someone had filled a huge china bowl with flowers and left it on the table. The girls ran upstairs to bag the best bedroom. That's when I realised the floorboards formed the living room ceiling and there was no soundproofing. Was all that only yesterday? The holiday hasn't really begun yet. Tomorrow, I used to tell myself. He'll ring tomorrow. And more often than not, you did. But now, if I look at tomorrow, it's all blank. I have to concentrate on today, one day at a time. No, one moment at a time. If I think about tomorrow, I begin to lose my grip on reality. When I mentioned laundry, the girls vanished. Oh, what else are mothers for, after all, but to take chores off young shoulders? Ben did offer to help, but it sort of dangled in the air, waiting for me to say no. I didn't, on principle. At least the natives are friendly. Halfway through breakfast yesterday morning there was a knock at the door. There was a woman on the step with a smile as broad as her beam. She had bumpy veins, grey wispy hair and a floral crossover pinafore like my granny used to wear. It turned out she was from the farm across the road, Madame Bonnet. She brought Chantal to meet the girls. Chantal appeared round the corner of the cottage a little bit at a time. Smile, then eyes, hands, pink cotton skirt and bare legs. She stood with her hands behind her back and giggled. She and Joanne must be about the same age. Madame Bonnet obviously started late. She's quite a bit older than I am. At least I hope she is. I thought French farmers were all poor peasants. Their farmhouse is big and modern with patio doors, and there's one of those big citrons parked down the side. Madame supplies the village shop with vegetables and salad. She made sure I understood we didn't need to pay their prices. Then she went home. Chantal stayed. Rachel stomped off looking peevish. She didn't want to have to play with her kid sister, but Chantal was trespassing. I ask you, kids? Both ours decided to come shopping with us. That won't last. So Chantal went home when we were ready to leave. The village was bustling. We took the last parking space in the little cobbled square. There was a signpost for the piscine. "What's a piscine for?" Joanne demanded. "Swimming," Rachel answered wearily. "I know that. It's a joke." Ha ha. "No, go on. What's a piscine for?" "I don't know. What's a piscine for?" "Pissing in." I shouldn't have laughed. She's in a rude jokes phase, and if I encourage her, she'll never outgrow it. But her giggle's infectious, and it reminded me of you. Every little thing brings you back. There was a weekend, a precious few days when we could play house. Me, washing up after lunch. You, hands covered in mud. You couldn't resist. My white jeans have never been the same. You're like a big lolloping puppy, and you love getting dirty and getting clean again. It's surprising what variations on the Kama Sutra a large man and a small woman can invent in the shower. But this is a family holiday. I'm not allowed to dream. We did the shopping and drove back here to the gîte. I went upstairs to change, and Ben loomed in the bedroom doorway, cutting off the sunshine which had suddenly decided to stream through the skylight. He was looking for a shirt. Not just any shirt, a particular one, an Old Faithful, the one I hadn't packed. He didn't say a word, but 3-4 times over the fortnight the shirt will be mentioned, with a sigh and a look of reproach. No one comes on this kind of holiday for the nightlife. Much to Rachel's disgust, all that was on offer last night was another trip to the village, on foot this time. All the same, she spent an hour in the bathroom and emerged looking stunning. For once she hadn't overdone anything. Cotton trousers, embroidered blouse, even her shoes were low-heeled. They're lovely, my girls, though I says it as shouldn't. Rachel's slim but round-hipped. Jo's tummy is still plump and her face is round and little girlish, but her legs seem to go up to her rib cage. We walked through the village as far as the river. The evening was pink and gold, making up for a mostly glum day. It was dusk as we walked back between the fields of corn and sunflowers. I burst into song. Joanne joined in, and then Rachel, finally Ben. She'd come round the mountain, worn pink pyjamas and driven 6 white horses, before Ben muttered to no one in particular, "We're being followed." There was a boy about 20 yards behind us. He was a beautiful specimen, about 16, big dark eyes and an unblemished suntan. To my surprise, he answered in English. "I am sorry, madame. I meant no impoliteness." His voice trailed away, and I realised he was looking over my shoulder. Rachel. Joanne jumped up and down beside me.
Mum! It's Chantal's brother! I bet it's Chantal's brother!
The boy smiled. "You are Joanne, I think?" Jo stopped bouncing and looked at her feet. Rachel nudged her. "Answer, dummy." She was right. His name is Luke. We carried on walking. He spoke mainly to me at first, but his eyes kept flicking away to Rachel. By the time we got back here, they were holding hands. I made some tea and they sat outside. Joanne was surplus to requirements. I bribed her indoors with chocolate biscuits. It was dark when Rachel came in. Joanne's voice carried through those paper-thin floorboards.
"Isn't he gorgeous?"
"Oh, shut up, dummy."
"Did he kiss you?"
M-Y-O-B.
"I'll ask Chantal."
You can't speak French.
"Can."
Can't.
"Can."
Can't. Ben erupted. He does occasionally. "Quiet up there! Sleep! Now!" There wasn't another sound. I sat, glad for once of Ben's silence, of the lack of contact that so often makes my teeth grind in frustration. If Rachel is about to fall headlong into adolescent love, I'm in there beside her, still floundering. I keep thinking I've put you away, wrapped your memory carefully to avoid damaging either it or myself. But there you were, barbs and all. An extra 25 years of experience hasn't taught me a thing. When we went to bed, there were signals vibrating in the air, a faint aroma of talc, socks removed before shirt. In bed he moved into the space he usually leaves between us, and a hand crept out and trickled across my stomach. was the first time since... I couldn't before. I just couldn't. The sight of Rachel with Luke had awakened something in me. I wanted you, not him. But he's here. Sometimes in bed you hurt me. Not on purpose. You just got carried away. Ben never hurts me. He's always gentle. Gentle. Not tender. Tender is eyes meeting. A touch filled with wonder. Perhaps something approaching reverence. Perhaps it's hard to feel that after 17 years. We've been here almost a week, and until today all we'd explored was the area between the Gite and the village. So this morning I suggested we went to a craft market in a town a few miles away. Joe was suspicious.
If you mean potters, they've always gone to lunch when we get there.
Shades of last year, a disastrous fortnight in the West Country. Ben just yawned and reached for a third croissant. Someone knocked on the door then. Rachel answered it and disappeared immediately. It was Luke. I thought she'd gone for the day, but she was back before I cleared the dishes. Luke was working in the fields and was on his breakfast break. Rachel was in a world of her own for the rest of the morning. Ben was irritated, but I found it quite touching. The market town was on the river. We found a cafe and Ben and Rachel sat outside at a table while Joanne and I nipped to the loo. When we came back, he was chuckling and she was scowling after a battered old Peugeot which shrieked away on bald tyres as we sat down. "Rachel just clicked," Ben announced. It seemed the driver of the Peugeot had sat down sociably and admired Rachel. "He was pissed," Ben declared. "He didn't mean any harm." Rachel just shuddered. So why does Luke present a threat when a pushy drunk is harmless? After lunch, Joanne took Ben off to climb the city walls. It was starting to rain again, so Rachel and I followed the sign for the craft market. There was a stall on the pavement selling rag dolls in Breton costume. "I'm going to buy one of those," she said. "For my costume doll collection." While she was choosing one, I bought some postcards and stamps. I took a pen out of my bag and wrote, "Having a lovely wish. Time you were here." A postcard doesn't count as making contact. Some days it hurts more than others. There was a postbox just across the street. On the way to it, I almost collided with Ben and Joanne. The postcard landed picture side down on the cobbles. My heart thumped as I picked it up, but they were both too busy falling out to notice. Ben had decided against the walls when he found there was a €7 charge. Rachel was where I'd left her, handing over money for a doll with a lopsided mouth that gave it character. "Come on then," Ben said. "Let's see what junk they've got in this market thing." That's my man. I blew up the balloon. He's ready with the pin. He whisked the girls past the stalls towards the door at the far end as if there was a prize for the fastest time. When I caught up, they were all grinning as if they'd won it. My patience wasn't in very good repair to start with. I took a deep breath and I counted to 10, and then I turned round and I went back. I couldn't have cared less if they'd followed me or not. Well, they did, of course. I found Rachel by a stall of painted silk, scarves, camisoles, swirling skirts, all in luminous colours. The stallholder took down a camisole and held it in front of Rachel. It was exquisite. A single grey figure silhouetted against a dawn sky. But €150. I bought it for her and told her not to tell Ben how much it cost. Amazingly, it was almost 5 o'clock. It was pouring as we drove home. Occasionally a huge raindrop smacked the windscreen between the wipers, and the water trickled up the glass instead of down. Ben explained it to me once. Something to do with drag coefficients and the car's motion. Wished afterwards I'd never asked. You wouldn't have turned it into a physics lesson. You'd have exclaimed along with me at the mystery of nature, the magic abroad in the world. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. This lock of hair here, almost totally white. I said something about growing old bit by bit. Ben just grunted. You're supposed to say something reassuring, I snapped. That's a husband's function. What? I said... Age is in the mind, not growing out of your head, you used to say. You and I would have spent the whole evening reliving the day. The girls used to do the same after every outing. They'd chatter on and on until Ben told them, half joking, to stop rabbiting on and give him a bit of peace. They don't do it anymore. I try. I do try. Maybe I'm polishing the memories to a high gloss because that's how I need them. Perhaps I'm asking too much of myself. You've only been missing 3 weeks. You're still lodged in my nervous system, like the amputated leg that still hurts. I better take care. If I keep losing my grip like that, Ben'll suspect something. The way I've been these past few days, it's a wonder he hasn't already. It had to end. We talked it through and through, almost quarrelled, cried, made love, talked again, cried again. And at the end the answer was the same. We had arrived at the point where we had to choose. Either we deliberately created the mayhem we'd taken such care to avoid for 2 years, or we called a halt. There was no way to have it all. When we got back, Luke was sitting on the wall. "Can we go for a walk, Mum?" Rachel asked. "All right," I said, "but don't go too far." Famous last words. The rain stopped as suddenly as it started. Ben mopped his deck chair off and sat in it. Joanne had already disappeared across the road. They're out there now, Rachel and Luke. I can hear their voices. Walk indeed. I wish you were here. We'd stand together and observe the course of young passion, and then get carried away in a tide of our own passion and make love right here on the floor, never mind the cold tiles. I feel as if I'm standing guard over them. This isn't going to end with a kiss. Joanne would think it was hilarious. He hasn't taken his eyes off her yet. It's beautiful. I ought to be horrified, outraged. But there was worship in Luke's eyes. She won't come to any harm. I've always wanted my girls to grow up believing sex is beautiful, not furtive and sordid. Oh, God, Ben! Oh, he's nodded off. Thank God for that. He'd send Luke packing and make Rachel feel like a slut. OK, I know it's because he only wants to protect her. But from what? A beautiful boy who's potty about her. "12. This is Rachel's watch. She probably hasn't a clue what time it is. That's what I told Ben, anyway. He's gone out to look for her. He was furious with her. Or more likely with Luke. Oh, she is naughty. Not that she's going to come to any harm with Luke. Not unless you count what Ben's thinking as harm. But she must know he'll be worried. After that little palaver this afternoon, too. Come to think of it, the whole day's been one to forget. The sky was clear blue this morning, so we decided to drive to the coast. By the time we arrived, it was hot enough for swimsuits, and that was the cue for the first up and downer. "Everybody's topless," Rachel wailed. Everybody being two girls laid out on the sand like well-basted sacrifices. She picked up a beach mat and flounced off to the other side of the rocks, only about 20 yards away, but far enough to pretend we were nothing to do with her. She lay down on her stomach, and I caught her looking at me as she reached round to unclip the top of her bikini. I decided to say nothing, as long as she stayed face down. Joanne and Ben reappeared then, in the middle of an argument. He wanted to go swimming, she didn't, or rather couldn't, but she wouldn't say so. A period started yesterday. She's been having them for nearly a year now, and she still isn't used to it. She calls them that rotten bleeding. Makes me say she's got a cold or verrucas in the note to school to excuse her from showers. Ben isn't allowed to know, and to be fair to him, he usually plays along. But this time he'd obviously missed the signals. "What's the matter with you?" he was saying. "You've had the sulks on all morning. Careful you don't get like Rachel." Talk about hobnail boots. Rachel wanted to swim, which diffused the Joanne situation. When they came back, it was time for lunch. "I'll stay and guard our stuff," Rachel said. "Bring me a ham baguette and a Diet Coke." She lay down on a beach mat and closed her eyes, and I thought, fine guard she'll be. But the only people on the beach were some boys kicking a ball around a good way off. We were only gone a few minutes, but when we got back, Rachel was nowhere to be seen. I had a moment of panic and then told myself not to be silly. She'd probably gone for another swim. And then I saw the boys over by the rocks. They were standing in a tight group, laughing and shouting. There was still no sign of Rachel. And then I glimpsed her in the middle of the group. She was laughing along with them. Until one of them grabbed at her bikini top and pulled it off. I must have looked pretty threatening as I ran across the sand and elbowed my way through the boys. They melted away with a few choice French expressions, and the one who'd threatened Rachel spat over his shoulder as he went. I picked up the bikini top and tossed it to Rachel. She put it on with a face like thunder. She'd already got the message. There was no need for a lecture. But that didn't stop Ben. She was still scowling when we got home. I sent her across the road to invite Luke and Chantal to supper, and she cheered up a bit. She's only got 2 more days, and there's a whole lot of hurt on the way for her when we go home. Love is more painful, not less, when you're 15. After supper, all 4 of them went off to the farmhouse. It never crossed my mind to worry, until Madame Bonnet knocked at the door. One of the cows was calving, and Monsieur Bonnet needed Luke to help. She left, shaking her head and clicking her tongue, but smiling. Monsieur would have to manage on his own. We'd spoken in French, and Ben waited for me to translate. Rachel and Luke have bunked off for a walk without telling Mother Bonnet. He dropped his playing cards and stood up. Bunked off where to? She won't come to any harm. He sat down and started another game of patience, but the cards kept landing on the floor. Where's Joanne, for God's sake? It's nearly 11 o'clock. Madame Bonnet's sending her home. Don't hassle them, we're on holiday. Jo bounced in after 5 minutes or so, full of the board game she'd won despite her lack of French. Ben glowered, and she looked at him and then back at me. Where's Rachel? I asked quietly, eyeing Ben and daring him to take it out on Jo. Dunno. They went out, her and Thingy. Haven't they come back? I wasn't worried for Rachel's safety, or her virtue for that matter. But Ben, what is it about teenage girls and their fathers? At home, Rachel is cleverer than Ben realises. If the party or the disco is an important one for some reason, and she never gives reasons, she keeps the curfew for a couple of weeks before it, then breaks it on the night and pays whatever penalty we name with only a token protest. A fortnight confined to quarters obviously isn't a high price when it's something that matters. There hasn't been a curfew when she and Luke have disappeared after supper these past few nights. Usually Joanne's gone too when they've arrived home together. Perhaps Ben's been deluding himself that little sister acts as chaperone. He started pacing the floor, fists clenched, glancing at his watch every few seconds. I thought I should be calming him down. But there was a huge chasm between us. Midnight came and went, and I did begin to prickle. What if there'd been an accident? What if they'd quarrelled out there in the black dark, and she couldn't find her way back? That was when I suggested Ben go out to look for them. When he'd gone, I broke my rule and pulled you firmly into my thoughts. I need something. Oh, Rachel. Some holiday this has been. When we get home, I'm going to do something really relaxing, like cleaning the oven. Until last night, I was developing quite an affection for this cottage. I had a little fantasy about living here, holed up for the winter, for as long as the woodpile lasted. Just me. No chattering girls, no looming presents, no cooking, no laundry. Until last night. I don't ever want to go through another night like last night. At 1:45, Ben came back, alone. He'd stepped in something wet and smelly, and I sent him straight upstairs to change. The wanderers were only a couple of minutes behind him. Rachel was tousled and pink. Luke picked something off the back of her shirt when he thought I wasn't looking. Ben must have heard the door. He appeared at the top of the stairs like Nemesis. He glared at Luke and pointed to the door. "You out!" But the lad stood his ground and clung onto Rachel's hand. She looked resentful and guilty at the same time. "Before you start," I said to Ben, "does she actually know the time? She left a watch on the table." He ignored me. "It's nearly 1 a.m. What the hell have you found to do until this time?" Careful, I thought, or she'll tell you. He hurled questions at her. What time did she think it was? Had she no consideration? What would Luke's parents have to say? Hadn't she thought I'd be worried sick? Leave me out of it, I thought. Once or twice Luke put out a hand and he might have said something if Ben had paused for breath, but he ranted on, and Rachel stood up straight, blank-faced, staring at a point a few inches behind his head. It's a technique she's been working on for, a couple of years now. Normally these stonewall tactics infuriate me as much as Ben. All I could do this time was watch helplessly and try to project sympathy. Ben must have used up a year's supply of words. Eventually I stuck my 2 penn'orth in. It's their last night, Ben. Go easy. He rounded on me then. You would stand up for her, wouldn't you? Like mother, like daughter. My legs nearly gave way. I took a deep breath and opened my mouth to send Luke home and Rachel to bed. Then it happened. Joanne. 1 second she was at the top of the stairs, rubbing her eyes and looking about 4 years old. The next there was an almighty clatter and a yell, and she lay in a heap at the bottom. It was like a freeze frame on the video. Everything stood still. Jo's been accident prone all her life. By the time she started school, the nurses in casualty knew her name. Most people take a first aid kit on holiday. We need a fully equipped operating theatre. This year she'd gone 2 whole weeks with not so much as a wasp sting. I should have known our luck couldn't last. Jo isn't one of nature's stoics. If she's hurt, she cries. But this time she lay quiet. Panic washed over me in slow motion. As I squatted beside her, she opened her eyes, made a small sound, and turned her head away to be sick. She tried to sit up and yelped as I touched her arm. It had an unnatural bend and her hand was swelling. Her face was creamy white and slick with sweat, and she began to cry, noisily and messily. The cotton wool which had invaded my brain ever since, for the past month, suddenly cleared, and I jumped to my feet. Ben took my place beside Jo and prodded the arm. Joanne screamed and he stepped back, glaring at Rachel as if it was her fault. She went into a huddle with Luke. I intervened and asked him where the nearest hospital was. That was obviously where we were going to spend the next few hours. We manoeuvred Joanne into some clothes and out to the car. Ben glowered at me as Luke climbed in. What's he coming for? I didn't trust myself to speak. You go on the big road from the village and turn to the right, Luke said, polite as ever. Ben stared at him for endless seconds. Joanne let go of a huge sob. Ben started the engine. I breathed out. Silence hung over that short journey like a thick grey mist. Ben drove too fast. Rachel stared out of the window all the way. Now both my fledglings have broken wings. I give more for Jo's chances of a complete recovery than Rachel's. The reception desk was deserted, but then it was nearly 2 a.m. Eventually a young man appeared and I launched into an explanation. Luke was right behind and that gave me confidence. The man started to fill in a long and complicated form, name, age, local address, when we were going home and so on. Ben paced the floor, muttering about bureaucratic bullshit. His daughter was injured, wasn't she? Well then, why didn't they do something, instead of asking a lot of damn fool questions? Luke slid away and joined Rachel. Ben came up behind me, and my French began to stumble as he flung in odd words. Then Joanne materialised at my other shoulder. Her colour was fading again, and her hand was puffy and purplish. "It hurts, Mum," she said. The man at the desk stood up and pointed down a corridor to the left. We set off and Rachel and Luke followed. Ben barked at them. "Stay here! You've done enough already!" Rachel sat down again, her face tight. I opened my mouth and then shut it again. I didn't want to speak to Ben in case he dropped another bomb in my lap. The casualty department was just down the corridor. There was another man waiting to explain the system. The cotton wool was threatening to seep back into my mind to cushion me from this nightmare. If it hadn't been for Joanne, I'd have left Ben to it. But she was visibly flagging. Between my bad French, the doctor's scanty school English and a bit of sign language, we coped. He called a nurse to help and told Joanne to shout if it hurt. I couldn't bear to watch. Joe yelled twice and groaned once. Then it was over. "Courageuse," the doctor said. We were shunted off into another room and 2 more nurses wrapped her arm in plaster bandages. "Everybody'll want to sign it," she said. But her sparkle had gone flat. Ben walked back to the car like a robot. He fumbled with the keys, dropped them, caught his head on the wing mirror as he picked them up. Then the car lurched when he started it. He hadn't checked to see if it was in gear. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windscreen. He was in no fit state to drive. I said so, and he didn't argue. He opened the door and we changed seats. 5 years ago his sister died of cancer. She was the only person I ever saw him banter with. She teased him, and he never clammed up on her like he does on me. But nothing showed when she died. I was the one that cried. I wept buckets. I was fond of her too, but those tears were out of all proportion. Funny. He seemed to feel better afterwards. Driving back, I understood, at last, why I shan't be the one to pick up the phone. I shall long for you, and I know I'll keep wondering if we made the right decision. I have a lot of adjusting to do, and it will take a long time for the pain to ease. But I'll survive. We're separate, you and I. You included me in your life for a while, in the way a book includes an illustration. We grew into each other's skin, and when we pulled apart it left scars. But it was never going to be permanent. We both knew I wasn't going to rat on my commitments, and maybe that shaped what we had from the beginning. Right to the end, you never really needed me. Ben does. I have to do his crying for him. When we got back to the gîte, I told Luke to be sure and send his mother to me for an explanation. Ben disappeared. I sent the girls straight upstairs and fought the temptation to open the bottle of brandy we bought to take home. I wasn't eavesdropping. I just couldn't help overhearing.
"Where were you? Everybody was looking for you."
Little girls do talk some rubbish.
"What were you doing? Did he do that to you?"
I never found out. Ben appeared from nowhere and roared from the foot of the stairs, "Go to bed!" Silence reigned. He didn't look at me. Come to think of it, he still hasn't said a word to me since last night. How much does he know? And how does he know? We were always so careful. And what will he do?
In Away From It All by Lynne Patrick, Jane was played by Susie Hawthorne. The play was edited by David Gilbrook and directed for Rumpus Radio Productions by John Goodrum.